interns. So today we're going to talk about common problems with the deadlift. We're going to go over how to actually coach and cue and set up a deadlift in person, but I wanted to give you a preview of various errors you'll see when people are actually performing the deadlift. Note too that at SABT we start everyone off with a kettlebell sumo deadlift, and then we move them onto the bar. For sake of time, I'm just going to show you all the errors we see with the bar, but know that most of them will apply to the kettlebell sumo deadlift too. You just won't see quite as many of them because there's not a bar in there to mess up things. So I'm also going to show you from a conventional standpoint, or a conventional stance as opposed to a sumo stance. I will show you both how to set them up in person, but really, again, most of the errors will apply to both stances. I'll show you the unique ones that are different for each one, but for the most part, we're just going to stick to, I'm just going to be doing a conventional stance when I show you the various things. So, in a deadlift, you want to, what an actual deadlift should look like when they're set up. They should be hinging from the hips. They should have a neutral spine, both at the cervical spine, thoracic spine, and at lumbar spine. Neutral does not necessarily mean that it has to be flat. Neutral means it should be in its natural curve. So there should be a slight curve to the lumbar spine, a slight concave curve to the lumbar spine, a slight convex curve this way to the thoracic spine, and then also a slight concave curve to the cervical spine. What you don't want to see, and you'll see this a lot, is someone too arched super hard, right here, so we have like a really arched hard, or we obviously don't want them to be rounded either at the thoracic spine or at the lumbar spine. I can't even round my spine that far. But you want to make sure that we're not deadlifting here, we're also not deadlifting and overarching here, but we're somewhere neutral in the middle. Also with the cervical spine, I think a lot of people will learn how to deadlift by looking up. We don't want to do that because we don't want to crank on the cervical spine. There's a lot of ways you can just impinge nerves and all that kind of stuff. So you'll see a lot of people set up their deadlift and they'll be here as they pull, and we want to make sure that spine stays neutral. So cervical spine should be neutral, chin should be tucked, not pulled all the way back here, but definitely tucked down as opposed to looking straight up. So that's just the basic setup you'll see when you're looking at someone. You want to make sure that their spine is in fact neutral. Another common problem you'll see regarding the spine or the upper back really is people are going to get really loose in their upper back. So when they go to pull, instead of pulling, from a nice tight position here, they're going to be rounded at the top here, and you'll see it as soon as you may not even see it until they start to pull if they're loose. They may be able to set up just fine, but they're not actually tight. So when they pull, they're going to look like that. Right as they start to lift up off the ground, the shoulders are going to round forward. The thoracic spine is going to pop up, and you want to make sure people are not doing that either. In order to correct that, you want to have them pull their shoulder blades down and back. A cue we really like is squeezing oranges under your armpits, because that's going to tighten up the upper back pretty well. You can also give a cue of break the bar, so when they're holding onto the bar, they try to break it around their legs. That's going to cause them to tighten their upper back as well. So we have that, and then also if their upper back is not tight, it will pull on the lower back. So the lumbar spine is going to take the brunt of it if the upper back is not tight, because they're going to lose that tension. That tension is going to have to stay somewhere, so it's going to stay in the lower back. Instead of dispersing along the spine, it's just going to be residing back there. So if people are complaining about their lower back is hurting and their lower back is staying flat, check their upper back to make sure they're tight, because that could be the actual source of the problem. Another problem you'll see in terms of actual movement of when the bar starts to actually move upwards is people are going to shoot their butt up first. So they'll get down here nice and tight, and then they're going to pop up here like this, and then essentially do an RDL on the way up. That is really common and really not good, because they're going to hang on those hamstrings a lot. They're going to be pulling on their lower back a lot. Essentially, it takes the butt out of the movement and just has them hanging from their hamstrings and their lower back. So we don't want that either. A way to fix that, a cue we really like, is pulling their sternum to the back wall or chest to the back wall. So if they're standing here, they want to think about pulling their chest to the wall behind them first. So hopefully that will synchronize the movements, because the chest and the hips should move at the same rate as opposed to the hips popping up and then the chest coming up. But shoulders and hips should rise at the same rate as they come up if they're pulling forward correctly. Sometimes that happens because They just don't know how to get set and get tight, and that's a whole nother story. But just make sure they're getting tight back there, and then having them pull their chest to the wall behind them seems to help synchronize the shoulders and the hips a little bit better. Another thing you'll see with that as well is people will, this one's a more subtle one you'll see, is people will kind of pitch forward into their toes, and you can tell because their hamstrings will start shaking a little bit on their way up, even if they're moving, even if their hips and shoulders are moving correctly. If they pitch forward, if their weight shifts into their toes too much, they're going to be pulling from their hamstrings a lot, and you'll see that start to shake. The key for that is just having to drive their heels to the ground as they push up. One way to think about it too is you could say you want to bury your heels into the ground as they stand up, and that should help with that posterior weight shift. So again, if they're pitching forward in their toes too much, you want to have them sit back in their heels to push through, because if not, they're going to not be able to get a whole lot of drive out of their glutes, which is really the driver of the deadlift. Another thing you'll see too is with the lower back, bracing is really, really, really important. By creating that intra-abdominal pressure, they're going to protect the spine, and also just be able to transfer force from the ground to their hands in order to lift the bar up. So intra-abdominal pressure is super important. We want to make sure we go over bracing with each athlete before they start actually deadlifting. And then even then, the concept can be very difficult to actually put in practice in moving parts like that. So in order to see, you can tell if someone's not bracing. One, if they say their back hurts, they're probably not bracing. Two, if you watch their deadlift when they start to pull, I'll try to pull my shirt tight so you can see it. But when they start to pull, you'll see a little bit of movement in the lower back like that. It might even be super, super slight. I'm exaggerating it, but you'll see a little bit of a shift down here. If they're not bracing properly down here, their lower back is going to move. The SI joint's going to wobble around. Or even if you see from the back and it looks like one side is rising before the other side, it means they're not bracing properly either. So that's the most common place you'll see them not bracing. Another place you'll see people break is right at the thoracolumbar joint right there. So where the lumbar spine meets the thoracic spine, you'll see people break there, and that's if they haven't learned how to brace in their ribs. So down here, we want to make sure when we brace, we get full 360 expansion all the way around from essentially this area is where it should be expanding and then locking down. If someone can brace down here just fine, they shouldn't have a problem in their lower back, but if they can't get rib expansion to either side to bring the air in, they're going to break from their thoracolumbar joint. So you want to make sure to teach them how to breathe in here and then really brace and lock it down. We'll go over bracing in person because I really want you all to feel it and to know the cues that I give for that. But just know that if you're seeing movement in the lumbar spine or the thoracic spine, bracing is probably going to be an issue, and that needs to be addressed very quickly because that's a matter of your spine being safe. Another thing I've seen when people say that their back hurts, but everything looks okay, but their back is still bothering them. Oftentimes, it's a very subtle thing, and it takes practice to get to see it. But you'll see someone initiate the pull with their lower back instead of their glutes. And I don't know if I can replicate it perfectly, but what it's gonna look, you have to get really close. But what it looks like up front is you'll see someone initially pull here, like that, as opposed to pulling up through their hips that way. I'm not sure if you can actually see a difference, but I'll try to point it out when I see it on the floor. But for the most part, people will start to pull from their lower back first, and then their glutes will kick in afterwards, as opposed to their glutes kicking in first and then pulling up from that way. What I tell people is start squeezing your butt or start cracking the walnut before you even get off the ground. So they should feel their butt get tight, and then they pull through, and that will help just sequence the muscles better, so that make sure that they're using their glutes first, which again is where we want to pull from, not from our lower backs. Trying to think, I don't think those are kind of the big things that we're looking for. So we want to make sure we have neutral spine, both cervical, thoracic, and lumbar spine. Want to make sure that they're bracing. Want to make sure their hips are coming through all the way. Oh, that's another thing. So hips may not come through all the way. They may finish their deadlift here. You want to make sure they do that extra pop on the way through. So make sure they're really squeezing their butt cheeks to pull all the way through. You'll see a lot of people finish their deadlift back here, meaning they're not actually finishing with their glutes, they're finishing with their lower back. In conjunction with that, you'll see people get to the top and pull up here. We don't want to pull way back here because, again, you're finishing with your lower back as opposed to your butt. I tell people, pretend you're going to get punched at the very top of the deadlift. So when they pull, they should end here. They should be in a straight line They should be stacked, shoulders, hips, knees, and toes. Yeah, shoulders and toes. No, they should all be stacked on top of it like that. So again, we want to make sure they're not pulling from back here or that they're finishing all the way through. So they should be neutral at the bottom and neutral at the top. And there, making sure they're posterior weight shifting, make sure they're not like falling into their toes, things like that. With the bar, one thing we'll see too is the bar is going to be too far away from their body, so you want to make sure their bar stays right up against their body. They'll either start with, about this much between their shins and the bar. That's no good. You want to have the shins right up against the bar. And there's different ways to teach that, but for the most part, we want to have a slight forward shin angle if you're doing conventional. Sumo should probably going to be a little bit more upright with the shin, so I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but in terms of like your shin angle to the bar, for conventional you should be more here. For sumo it's going to be more here in terms of uprightness. And then the bar should stay really close to the body as it goes up and down. You'll also see people push the bar away from them as they go down again. That's going to put a lot of strain on their lower back, so have them shove the bar into their thighs as they go down. So the bar should move in a straight line up and down. That's the easiest way to move from point A to point B is a straight line, so make sure the bar moves in that pathway. As far as setup goes, you'll see some people will be either too far in front of the bar or too far behind the bar. You want to have roughly the spine of the scapula should be right on top of the bar. So what that looks like is you're going to have someone here where the spine of my scapula is right on top of the bar. Some people will sit too far back and be behind the bar, or they'll be too far forward, they'll be pitched over the bar like this, but you want to be right on top of the bar here. This is another good place to address starting position. Some people will start too much of a squat like this. Again, shoulders are going to be behind the bar. Some people will be too straight, so their shoulders are going to be in front of the bar. So you want to be somewhere nicely in the middle like that. Same with sumo. The spine of the scapula should be right on top of the bar. Again, it's going to look a little bit different just because of the body angle, but you want spine of the scapula right on top of the bar, and that will pretty much align wherever they are. Because they won't be able to be too far in front or behind, and therefore their hips should be in roughly the right place. Depending on people's body length, we may have to do some adjustments, but that's a pretty good starting point for most people. From there, you want to make sure the knees don't cave in, so no valgus unconventional. You'll see it in sumo sometimes, where people will start and their knees are going to be already pulled in like this, so just make sure toes are out, knees are out, and they should be able to push outwards this way. So I think we've kind of covered everything from head downwards. So you may need to watch this a few times just to make sure you pick up all the things you should be looking for. Again, we're going to go over how to actually coach and set up a deadlift in person, but I wanted you to get an idea of what to be looking for that's incorrect so that you can learn. It'll be easier to learn how to actually do it correctly.